Hello, I'm Carrie, and I'm really excited to be back again to Ocali. It's a pleasure to be here, even though we're kind of in parallel cyberspace together. And I really hope everybody is doing well. My presentation today is on bibliotherapy. And I hope you enjoy it. I think I've used it more and more over the more recent years with tremendous success. So hopefully you'll find it interesting. And here we go. This hour, I will be talking about bibliotherapy. I'll be telling you what it is. Also, what does neuroscience say about bibliotherapy and the benefits of bibliotherapy? Why it might be so successful. And finally, I will be giving some examples throughout the presentation of bibliotherapy and how it works, not only for students that you work with, your children, or even yourself. Caregivers benefit a lot by reading memoirs of individuals with autism, and that is all a part of bibliotherapy. Okay, first of all, I want you to think about somebody that you know who has trouble managing their emotions or solving social problems, and I want you to write their name down. Okay, I want you to do this because then they're right here, front and center in your mind. As I'm talking, think about this person, think about what I'm saying and how it relates, how what I'm saying could help this person or even help yourself. And then if you have questions, go ahead and type them in, and my electronic clone will answer those questions as we go through the presentation. Okay, bibliotherapy, what is it? Bibliotherapy is using a narrative to teach social and emotional information. Evidence-based, story-based intervention is a part of bibliotherapy, but bibliotherapy is far broader than that. It's much more global than just what the definition of story-based intervention. Historically, there are two different types of bibliotherapy. There's developmental bibliotherapy, which is what you would use in a classroom, what you would use at home. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. There also is another type, and that's called therapeutic bibliotherapy. And that is used in official mental health treatment. In modern years, bibliotherapy has really extended itself. It's gone beyond just books, and it includes movies, it includes short stories, it includes even cartoons, a variety of different ways to teach using those formats of story. An American novelist, Joyce Carol Oates, said this: "Reading is the sole means by which we slip involuntarily, often helplessly, into another's skin, another's voice, another's soul." I think that pretty much wraps up the essence of bibliotherapy as you go through learning about it. I want to share with you my first experience with bibliotherapy on myself. And I think everyone can relate to this. And here is my dog-eared copy of this book. And this book was the first book ever written by Temple Grandin. It's called Emergence, Labeled Autistic. And I'm going to read one little tiny piece from this book, and I think you can understand how it impacted me back in 1986, when I had all my training and all of my interventions were based on very strict behaviorism. We had no understanding of what was beneath, what all of those other issues were that were involved in, and excuse me, responsible for, in the end, the behavior that we were observing. Uncomfortable laughter, uncontrollable laughter, constant questioning and talking, an obsession with particular topics are common characteristics of autistic children. My fixations reduced arousal and calmed me. Too many therapists and psychologically trained people believe that if a child is allowed to indulge in his fixations, it will do irreparable harm. I do not think this is true in all cases. Fixations can be guided into something constructive. So that's just one little paragraph of my very, very first insight into what it must feel like to experience autism, to live with autism, and deal with autism on a daily basis. What is it? What does it mean? It really impacted my understanding of repetitive behaviors, emotional control, social confusion, sensory experiences. And this was back in 1986. So that was my first introduction to what is bibliotherapy, although I didn't know it was called that. Historically, on one of the oldest libraries in the country, on the eaves of that library is inscribed House of Healing for the Soul. So you can see that even, and this was back 100 years ago, but even before that, the practice goes back to 800 years, using reading to solve social and emotional problems. In 1916, Samuel Crothers coined the term bibliotherapy. And after World War I, the hospitals, the military hospitals, started adding libraries for the soldiers to use reading to help them navigate their own emotional issues. And in 1920, universities started to write curriculum to teach others how to use bibliotherapy in their practice. And in 1941, the practice of bibliotherapy was recognized as official treatment. Here's an example that I think you'll be able to relate to. Perhaps you have a high school student, or you are a parent of a high schooler, and you want to use bibliotherapy. Well, here are two examples of how that might look. Most of you are familiar with The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. That is a beautiful novel. And for a high school student to read that novel, to understand how the main character thinks and feels about situations is really helpful. And it gives you a starting place to talk about those issues, like how do you think and how do you feel about different things. And then there is the example of a memoir. Erica Hammerschmidt wrote Born on the Wrong Planet. And I wrote the foreword for her. This is really a wonderful book because Erica went on to go to college. She had a relationship. She got married. So she has a lot to say. And I think her story is very comforting and helpful. And it's one that a lot of individuals with autism can relate to. Here's a really good example from that book, from when she was a child and at camp. Nature Hour. Sitting in a circle on the floor of a garage-shaped building in a field with a curly-haired lady talking to us. One of the kinds of insects you'll find here at camp is spiders, she lilts, with the air of someone imparting great knowledge to the next generation. And my voice inevitably counters. Spiders aren't insects, they're arachnids. Erica, we don't interrupt. Wait your turn to talk. Spiders have 8 legs. Insects have 6. Well, they're a kind of insect. My mouth contorts. Blood pounds in my brain. The familiar itching begins in my limbs and face, which means they are crying out to crush something, hit someone, bite someone. I throw back my head in despair and clench my hands in a futile attempt to ease the ache of staying still, of not climbing over the other campers to attack the nature teacher. So that's one example that Erica talks about in talking about her inability to tolerate incompetence in adults. That was one of the issues that she had growing up. And it's really beneficial for adults to read what Erica has to say. And it's really beneficial for other autistic individuals to read what Erica's story is about and to see how far she's come. So bibliotherapy and neuroscience. Reading fiction improves a reader's ability to put themselves in another person's shoes. And this comes from the research of Dr. Raymond Marr. He does functional MRI research where they actually look at the brain under different conditions. And what he found was that the part of the brain that gets busy when you're actually trying to solve a social dilemma, and the part of the brain that gets busy when you're reading about a character solving a similar problem is the same. So the same part of the brain gets busy under both conditions. So basically, there's an overlap in the brain networks where the brain is used to understand stories and those that are used to navigate real situations. Overlap between the two. And fiction, he found, was particularly good for developing the ability to solve problems that are otherwise pretty tricky. And in his research, he found that books and movies and being read to aloud from a book all are included in this particular finding. So that when you are reading a book, when you are watching a movie about a character and they're solving a problem, or even when your teacher or parent is reading a story to you, which really goes to the heart of how beneficial chapter books are. So when we think about this, think about how elementary school years, during those years, children are spending hundreds of hours interacting, playing, and solving problems in increasingly complex ways. So social play involves planning and negotiating and problem solving and even flexible thinking. And this happens throughout childhood. Well, here's a cartoon that goes to the heart of what you might be experiencing with autism. Come and pick me up. This is going nowhere. So peer interaction might be over-celebrated. In the autism world, it might not be as exciting as it might be for others. So it's important for us to understand that autism involves a delay in relationship skills, and in that a person with autism might actually have fewer opportunities to practice social problem solving. And social problems activates solving social problems. It activates exercising a particular part of the brain. Well, what Marr's research showed was that reading about a character in a book who has a similar problem also exercises that same part of the brain. So my thinking is that bibliotherapy, although it would never replace real-time social interaction, it could augment exercising the brain for somebody who's not getting a lot of practice with social interaction. So that if you have a child or if your student is not getting those hundreds of hours of social interaction at school, reading a book is probably a good idea. Reading a story about a character with similar problems is probably a good idea. Even watching a movie about a character who has some similar problems would also be a good idea. So, most individuals, most children with autism tend to have significant problems with emotional regulation. And this can lead to a loss of emotional regulation, like screaming, biting, kicking. So it's not unusual for young children with autism to experience these problems. So the recommendation would be finding a story that has characters who have the same problems, similar issues that they're dealing with. What I found was that there are very few books for upper elementary, that would be 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, that have characters who have that level of difficulty with emotional regulation. So I wrote one. Some of you may be familiar with Adeline's Claire, and it's a book that I wrote back in, when did I write this one? This one was in 2012. And then I actually relaunched the book in 2020. So it's a book about a 4th grade girl she's highly anxious. She hasn't had much success in finding friends. And her teacher at school brings in Claire, who is a therapy dog, to help her control her anxiety, and help her find some friends, help her socially. And the way this works is that Adeline loses control of her emotions, but she has a safe place to go to calm down. And she has a calming routine that she learns at school. And this is all built into the story. Claire has a therapy dog that is charged with helping her to relax and to find some friends. To add to the story, there are some really smart animals who understand and appreciate neurodiversity, and they appreciate Adeline. So those animals, they're in the science room, and they help Claire understand Adeline. Adeline, throughout the story, has some setbacks, but she works through them with some strategies that are explained through the story. The science club in the story focuses on using special interests to foster friendships. Adeline, throughout the story, learns some coping skills. And there are some disappointments throughout the story, some struggles, and a lot of work, but in the end, there's a happy ending. I think it's an enjoyable story, and it's quite helpful, and it really fits the parameters of bibliotherapy. The main character has similar problems to many of the students that I worked with. It's a fun, I hope, and engaging story. I like to think so. The challenges of both social and sensory issues are part of the story, integrated into the story, so the character has them and deals with them. And special interests are dealt with in a very positive way. And also, when I first wrote the book, I used 4th and 5th and 6th graders from 3 different schools to sort of field test the book itself with all students. And I found that the story really humanized Adeline. The readers liked Adeline. And so it helped to teach some empathy skills to these students when it came to looking at another student who might have difficulty controlling their emotional regulation. Bibliotherapy also kind of looks at some other strategies that have been around for a while and shows that they were really a good idea and why they were a good idea. These two curriculum pieces were developed at Cambridge University, and they are curriculum for teaching emotions, and they both use video to teach, so that in mind reading, you not only look at a face and try to teach what that face is saying, but also it shows a little film clip, a little video clip of that person experiencing that emotion. So you can hear the tone of voice, you can see the difference, changes in their expression on their face. In some of the little videos, you see the whole body. So you see all the body language that goes into expressing an emotion. It's really, really a good program. If you haven't looked it up, it's worth it. And then for really young children, they developed the other one called transporters. And in that case, they use vehicles to increase interest on the part of the children. And they put these human faces on the vehicles so that you can clearly see their emotional expressions when they proceed through the stories in the video. So mathematicians do not study calculus because it's dull and boring, right? They study it because they love it. And this goes to the heart of special interests and why it's important to make use of special interests. A researcher, Mary Ann Winter Messiers, did some research in this area, talking about how to harness the power of special interests and using them to increase motivation in your students with autism. And this book here that's shown the children who lived. Very good example of using special interests to teach emotional issues. And in this case, the book is for therapists, and it uses Harry Potter characters to teach about grieving to children and adolescents. Okay, this cartoon, you've got the grumpy man sitting in the chair, and then you have his wife and his cat and his dog and his parrot. Everybody's trying to figure out, was it something I did? Why does he feel this way? Well, what we know is we don't only have the ability to do that, to look at somebody, recognize an emotion, and then process in our own minds what might be happening in their mind. But we're driven to do that. How do you teach something like that? That is at the core of really truly understanding another person's emotions and another person's actions. Well, Dr. Marr, who studied bibliotherapy, says that trying to figure out the thoughts and feelings of another person can be developed through stories, books, and even movies. And that makes me feel really good because there was a lot of teacher guilt when I realized back in the 90s that movies actually did benefit some of the students I was working with. And at that time, I think it was looked on as a babysitter, as something that was really meaningless. But now we know that actually video is a very strong learning channel for many autistic students and children. In a movie, you've got character development, you've got different social situations that they're facing and solving, and you're learning about emotional expression through the characters. So it's really quite beneficial, and it goes a long way in helping that old teacher guilt that was put on many of us that realized that actually years ago, but the rest of the world just didn't realize how powerful movies could be. There was a book written about this. If you're not familiar with it, you really should read this one. It's called Life Animated. And it was written by Ron Susskind. And he is a father to Walt, who is a young man with autism. The story really focuses on raising Walt and how Walt didn't really have conversations and talked very little until he was about 9 years old, when they realized that all of these Disney musicals the animated musicals that he was sort of obsessed with watching over and over again, where he would rewind a scene and watch it again and rewind it and watch it again. He was actually learning about emotions and understanding social interactions. And at age 9, that sort of came out, and he started interacting with his family, first in the characters in different movies that he enjoyed, and later on his own. So he was sort of parallel learning. He was learning through the characters in these animated Disney characters, and then later started relating the emotions of the characters in the movies to the characters in his own life, to his brother, to his parents, and to himself. There was a documentary also by the same name, Life Animated, where it documents what happened, what Ron Suskind was talking about in his book, and where Walt is today, and how he benefited from his love of animation. What kind of came out of Walt's story is a whole idea for therapy. It's called Affinity therapy, has not yet been officially studied, but there's interest at the scientific level. And some people call it Disney therapy. And it basically, the theory behind affinity therapy is that some children can develop social and emotional instincts and core information and knowledge through the characters that they love, the Disney characters that they watch over and over again. This reminded me of a couple of twins that I met decades ago when we had the VHS. And I went to their house. This was prior even to a diagnosis, but both twins ended up with a diagnosis of autism. And as I observed them, the one thing that was really striking is they had no expressive language at the time. However, they would go over to the video library and pull out a cassette and put it into the VHS. They'd turn everything on and they'd play it up to a favorite scene from whatever movie they put in, and they'd rewind it and watch it over again. And they would laugh and laugh, and they'd rewind it and watch it over again. And they would laugh and laugh. And at that time, I have to say that a lot of people would have said that it was sort of a splinter skill and it didn't mean that much. But now we're learning that, yes, in fact, it did mean quite a bit. It really, really talked to how brilliant those twins were in their own way of learning, even though they couldn't yet communicate that with their parents or their teacher. Looking at some example books for working with very young children, there is a handout that will be shared with you through O'Callaghan. And in that handout, these books are listed. So if you're wondering if you're going to be able to get a bibliography of the books that I'm mentioning, yes, they will be on that handout. So When My Worries Get Too Big is a book I wrote 20 years ago for a young boy, a 5-year-old boy who was having difficulty controlling his emotions. And so it really is a child's introduction to relaxation and understanding, giving the feelings that go along with anxiety, those internal feelings, giving them a name. And we named it worries. And realizing that even though that child has a lot of really, really great skills, sometimes his worries just get too big. And those worries are a part of him, but they just get too big. And how can I fight back against those worries when they get too big? And then, of course, there is Julia Cook's numerous books. One of my favorites is this Decibella and her 6-inch voice, talking about when your voice gets too loud. So in the Worries book, there is the calming sequence, a way to help to teach how to calm your body when anxiety gets too big. And it makes use of what's called habit memory. And habit memory has been found in research to be quite helpful when you face an anxiety-provoking situation where other forms of processing information are not working well. Your brain is not working well when it comes to processing other cognitive abilities that you might otherwise have. If you're highly stressed, it doesn't work so well. But what does seem to work is habit memory. That is overlearned routines. So in the Worries book, children are introduced to a calming sequence, which is making use of that overlearned routine. In there, you're fighting back. You're using imagery of fighting back against your worries when they get too big. So it's not saying that worries are bad, because it's not really a bad thing. It's just that sometimes they get too big. And so when they get too big, you have to fight back. And this is a type of relaxation. It also uses or you can use, video self-modeling to teach this story to a child. So if you have the book or you're familiar with the book, you can introduce it to your child or to your student through a video. And in that case, they can study the video over and over again, just like the twins I was mentioning. Your student can look at the video and look at it, rewind it, look at it again, look at it again. Oh yeah, now we don't have to rewind. Come on, Carrie. However, you want to repetitively look at the video over and over again. And here is an example of Bria and her video.
I am really good at coloring and writing. When I think about my favorite things, I feel relaxed. There are one or two.
Too much.
Sometimes I just worry too much. My worries are out of 4. I feel like throwing and pushing. Sometimes I worry too much. This is a 5. Now my worries are too big. But I can fight back. First I can squeeze my hands together. Now I can feel like that with a 2-hour freeze. Now I can think about happy things, like an incinerator or a 2-story house. Now I'm at a 1.
Okay, and so that was Bria using her video to teach herself relaxation by watching it over and over again. It was very successful, and I've used it with many students over the years. Don't forget our old friends here. This is Power Cards. Power Cards goes back about 20 years. And in Power Cards, you define a problem and you put it into a written short story, which is a part of Bibliotherapy. But in this case, you give the problem to Spider-Man or another character that your child or your student loves. So it might be SpongeBob SquarePants. It could be any other character. And then that character solves the problem. It directly teaches about a problem, directly teaches strategies to teach about the problem, and it also takes the edge off because the child is not thinking about the problem for themselves. Instead, they're looking at Spider-Man and how Spider-Man is solving the problem. Okay, looking at young adults. Here are 3 examples of strategies that could be used with young adults in bibliotherapy. In these examples, there are two memoirs, Born on a Blue Day and Be Different, both written by men with autism, about growing up with autism and their strengths, their experiences. And then the third is The Rosie Project, which is a novel, and it's a delightful novel about a man who goes about in a very highly systematic way trying to find a girlfriend. Let me just read a little tiny piece of Born on a Blue Day. Daniel Tammet is highly systemized in how he thinks. And a lot of my work with the incredible 5-point scale is about systemizing. So his book really went a long way in helping me understand how important numbers and systems could be to somebody with autism, but also something like being a rigid thinker, how that might be helpful for a person with autism. Feelings of high anxiety were common for me throughout my time at school. I became upset if a school event was announced at short notice in which everyone was expected to take part, or by chance in the normal routine of class, by changes in the normal routine of class. Predictability was important to me. A way of feeling in control in a given situation, a way of keeping feelings of anxiety at bay, at least temporarily. So here, kind of the rigid thinking, the need to keep the schedule exactly the same was actually helping him from exploding or having some kind of loss of emotional control because there was a change in his schedule. And that is really, really powerful for me. That kind of information is powerful in understanding my students that I was working with at the time. I highly recommend that you keep a topic list. Keep a list of different things that you might want to work on, whether it is losing control, big feelings, bullying, body language, anxiety, a list of topic areas and then put your books underneath it so that keep a list of the books that you have come across that you have found to be really useful, and then put them on a list as they relate to different topic areas. That makes it easier for you to use them in your curriculum at school, use them with multiple students. And I recommend that you really look at the library in your school and see what kind of books they have, and then use those books. If you're using this therapy at home with your child, I would recommend you go to the local library and see what books you have access to and make a list of those books so that you are really making use of the libraries that you have available to you. Okay. Many of you might know, some of you might not know that back a few years ago, about 12 years ago, I was writing the Social Times. It was a little social skills magazine. And each one of the magazines had what we called the main event. And the main event was a small written article about a particular topic, a topic that was perhaps difficult for a student that I was working with. And what I'm doing, on my website, and I've got my website shown here, 5pointscale.com. If you go to my website, there's a sign up. You can sign up for a newsletter, and it's not trust me, it won't be used very often, but I am relaunching all of my books. And so there will be emails sent to those who sign up about how to access the books in the future, where you can find them, and when they will be available. But at the same time, I will be starting to post these stories from the Social Times on my website, maybe 2 a month. And I'll send out an email to let you know when they're up there. And you can download them. You can start using them. There's the body language like you see here, but also a lot of the other topics that I mentioned: bullying, anxiety, understanding friendships, maintaining friendships. There are a lot of stories. I've got 25 of the stories. And so those will be posted online, as well as some original hidden curriculum cartoons that we also used in the Social Times magazines. And I'll be posting those on my website as well. And they are in a downloadable form. So teaching positive social routines with a video. I want to just end by going into that in a little more depth. Teaching using self-modeling. Video self-modeling. What you do is you define an action that you want to see. And, what do you want him to do differently? What do you want her to do or learn how to do? And then you break that action into steps. And you videotape the person doing each step. And sometimes you might have to fake it. In one of the little examples that I'm going to show you of Dylan, we had to fake that he was sharing. He wasn't really sharing. But even the fake worked to help him notice and understand what sharing was all about. And then you kind of piecemeal the video together. And Tom Buggy, who did the research in the area of video self-modeling, highly recommends you have a cheering section at the end of your video so that you have this short video of the person doing what you want them to know how to do, and you have them cheered on in the end for success. And then the person can watch that video over and over and over again. Again, you making use of that habit memory, making use of that desire to study something like social interaction, which may not be as easy to understand for somebody who has autism as it might be for somebody else. So this cartoon kind of goes to the core of sharing. And I would share, but I'm not there developmentally. And when we think about sharing, we don't often think about it as a developmental milestone, but it is. And we often use language that might be kind of blaming, like he's selfish, rude, self-centered, inconsiderate, greedy. So our language is kind of blaming, and yet it's a developmental skill. So we need to teach developmental skills that don't come naturally to some students or some children. So the skill is really joint attention and joint pleasure. You have to have joint attention and joint pleasure in order to really understand why sharing might benefit you. Why am I motivated to share at all when I really love doing this? I love this toy. Why would I want to share it with somebody else? So I'm going to show you this first video, which is Melanie and her father. Now, Melanie is an adult with autism. She does not speak a lot. She speaks. She doesn't speak a lot. So she doesn't communicate well about her feelings. And her family likes to go out to dinner, and they like to go to restaurants that have this. Their favorite restaurant is this place that has family dining. So you order for your family, and it all comes to the table in one big tray of shrimp and one big side salad, and everybody serves themselves. Well, Melanie was having a hard time sharing. and she wanted all of the shrimp. And so she would have a kind of a meltdown in the restaurant, and it was hard for them to take Melanie with them when they went to the restaurant. So when we talked about video self-modeling, her parents said, let's try that. Let's try a video of Melanie sharing with her father. So this is the video, and what she does is we used a sequence of stop, take a few breaths, look at your photo album, which is very calming for her, and use some Play-Doh, which is also very calming for her. So her father tries to share some chips. She gets a little upset. She stops. She takes some deep breaths. She looks at her photo album. She squeezes some Play-Doh, and then she relaxes, and everybody cheers. And she ends up watching this over and over and over again. And this happens to be one that really worked.
Two, three, four, five. I am in control.
Yay!
Yay! Good job, Mel! Yay! Woo-hoo! Yay! Way to go! Yay! Excellent! Excellent!
Okay. And keep in mind that it is Melanie's video, and Melanie does not, spoken language is not her forte. And hearing and processing auditory information is not her strength, but visualizing is, and she does read words. So that's why it was silent, except for some written words during her video. So for the last video, and I'm going to let Dylan close out this presentation. For the last video, I'm looking at Dylan, who is a very young child in Trinidad, who I asked his parents what they would like for him to learn to do. And they said they'd like him to learn to share his toy. So we filled out a form, which is a form that I recommend everybody kind of look at filling out prior if you've got an issue that you'd like to work on. And this really comes from the work of Ross Green, Dr. Ross Green. But first of all, what is he doing that you wish he wasn't? And in Dylan's case, he's hitting. What would you rather do? You would rather he share. What skills does he need to do that? Well, we just learned about it: joint attention and shared emotions. How can you teach those skills? We're going to try video self-modeling. So Dylan, when we went to do this, Dylan's teacher asked for him to share his toy, and you'll see his mouth kind of go down towards her hand, and he was going down for the bite. So we cut it. And when we cut it, then we spliced in the next scene. It looks like he actually shared, but he didn't. We faked the whole share. So it was a faked share, but it still worked. So here's Dylan. Here's Dylan's video on sharing.
If you see your name, touch it with a pen.
Here you go, your pen.
My turn. Thank you, Dylan. Yay. Wow, Dylan shared his game. Yay!
Okay. Dylan shared his game. And in that particular video, we had the silent clap, because Dylan doesn't like applause. He doesn't like the sound of clapping. So his parents and extended family did a silent clap for him. Anyway, Dylan also happens to be a person who prefers written information rather than spoken information. So there are very few words used, except, and then there was a big, Dylan shared his game in writing to really emphasize to Dylan while he watches it what he did right. Anyway, what we are looking for is for this to teach Dylan, or at least allow Dylan to practice the two skills he seems to lack. One is the joint attention and joint social pleasure. So joint attention is two or more people enjoying a common object. In this case, it would be the video. So looking at the video, looking at each other, and looking back at the video. So there's like this joint attention, and this is awareness that we're both enjoying it. The other thing is looking at the other person and smiling, giving some indication that this is fun. Look at this. We're sharing an event. Okay. All right. Well, what we did then was we showed Dylan his video for the first time. And so I videotaped him watching it for the first time. Off screen are his parents on either side of off screen. So I want you to watch Dylan and watch how he naturally practices joint attention and exhibits joint social pleasure. And this will be it for the presentation.
Let's go, Dylan. Look, she's sharing. Yeah, she's sharing. Way to go, Dylan.
Okay. And with that, I say thank you for joining me today. Thanks for choosing to come to my session, and I hope you can enjoy and make use of bibliotherapy.